All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today
Deep, deep.
into some serious wisdom. We're talking about the parables of Jesus,
Yes.
specifically from the source you provided, the parables of Jesus. Simple stories, deep truths. Now, you're probably familiar with the idea of parables,
Right.
these short, relatable stories. But they're so much more than just those simple tales. They're packed with insight about the kingdom of God and how we should live our lives. And we're going to focus on two of the most well-known today, the parable of the Sower and the Good Samaritan. Ready to unlock some of that timeless wisdom.
Let's do it. I think one of the most fascinating things about parables is how Jesus takes these everyday situations, things that people in his time would instantly understand, and he uses them to reveal these profound spiritual truths.
Exactly. So let's start with the parable of the Sower, just to refresh everyone's memory. It's about a farmer who scatters seeds, and those seeds land on different types of ground, leading to different outcomes. But of course, it's not really about farming, right?
Yeah. Right. It's a metaphor. The seeds represent the word of God, and the different types of ground represent the different ways people receive and respond to that word. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Jesus very carefully chose each type of ground to illustrate a specific spiritual obstacle.
Okay, so let's unpack those, starting with the seed that falls on the path. What's the deeper meaning there?
Well, the path represents those whose hearts are hardened or distracted. So distracted that the word can't even penetrate. It's like trying to plant a seed on concrete. And this makes total sense when you think about the context of Jesus' time. Imagine all the noise and chaos of daily life back then, the constant struggle for survival. It's easy to see how people's hearts could become like that hardened path, unable to really receive anything new.
And isn't it interesting how that idea of distraction is still so relevant today? I mean, we might not be worried about literal survival in the same way, but, we have our own modern day distractions.
Oh, for sure.
Social media, the 24/7 news cycle, that pressure to be on all the time. It's like our minds are constantly bombarded with information.
It's almost like that path has become even more crowded,
Right.
harder to break through. So cultivating a space for stillness, for reflection, that's becoming more and more crucial in our modern world.
Totally. Okay, next up is the rocky ground. This is the seed that initially sprouts, but then withers away when the sun comes out.
Exactly. This represents those who hear the word and are initially excited, maybe even make some outward changes. But their faith lacks depth. It hasn't taken root deeply enough. So as soon as challenges arise or their initial enthusiasm fades, they give up. They're not able to withstand the inevitable heat of trials and tribulations.
Okay, so how do we avoid becoming that rocky ground? Because I think we've all experienced that, that fleeting enthusiasm, that initial burst of motivation that just kind of fizzles out when things get tough. What's the key to developing that deeper, more resilient faith?
I think it's about going beyond the surface level, asking ourselves why we believe what we believe. It's about actively engaging with our faith, wrestling with the tough questions, and allowing that process to deepen our understanding and commitment.
So it's not enough to just passively accept what we're told. We need to actively seek understanding and build a strong foundation for our beliefs.
Precisely. And that leads us to the third type of ground, the thorny ground. This one is all about the things that choke out the word. Jesus mentions worries, the pursuit of wealth, the desires for other things.
So it's not necessarily that these people reject the word outright. It's more like it gets crowded out by all these other priorities, right? Because we think about how busy everyone is these days, constantly chasing after something.
Yes, and this is where the historical context is so important. In Jesus' time, wealth and possessions were seen as signs of God's favor. So for him to say that these things could actually hinder spiritual growth, that was a radical statement. He was challenging the prevailing social norms and calling people to examine their priorities.
It's almost like he's saying, don't let the pursuit of worldly success become so all-consuming that it chokes out the things that truly matter. Things like love, compassion, and connection with something greater than yourself.
Exactly. And that message is just as relevant today, perhaps even more so in our materialistic, consumer-driven society. We're constantly bombarded with messages that tell us we need more, that our worth is tied to what we own or achieve. So this parable is a powerful reminder to step back and examine what's truly important, to make sure we're not letting those thorns take over our lives.
Okay, so we've talked about the path, the rocky ground, and the thorns, all these obstacles to spiritual growth. But now let's get to the good stuff, The seed that falls on good soil. This is the ideal, right? This is what we're all aiming for.
Absolutely. This is where the seed finds fertile ground, takes root, grows strong, and produces a bountiful harvest. And in the spiritual sense, this represents those who hear the word, understand it, and integrate it into their lives. They allow it to shape their thoughts, their actions, their very being.
And the harvest in this case isn't literal grain, right? But something far more profound.
Yes, it's the fruit of the Spirit. Now, in Christian theology, the fruit of the Spirit isn't just this random list of good qualities. It's about embodying the very nature of God. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are the qualities that naturally flow from a life rooted in God.
So it's not just about following a set of rules or going through the motions of religious rituals. It's about a deep internal transformation that manifests in our character and our actions.
Exactly. And that transformation, that's the true harvest of a life lived in alignment with God's word.
So if we think back to those other types of ground, it's like Jesus is saying, be mindful of what you're allowing to take root in your heart. Are you letting distractions, shallowness, or worldly pursuits choke out the good stuff? Or are you creating space for those seeds of love, compassion, and wisdom to flourish?
It's a powerful image, isn't it? This idea of cultivating our inner landscape, tending to our spiritual gardens so that we can bear the fruit of the Spirit. And it's something that requires ongoing attention, ongoing cultivation.
So, thinking about these different types of soil, it makes you wonder, what kind of ground are we cultivating in our own lives?
Yeah.
Where do we fall on that spectrum? Are we more like the hardened path, the rocky ground, the thorny ground, or are we striving to be that good soil?
That's a question we all need to wrestle with, honestly and thoughtfully, because the quality of our soil will determine the kind of harvest we produce, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of those around us.
All right, so we've thoroughly dug into the parable of the sower, wouldn't you say? But now, let's shift gears a bit and explore another parable with a different feel, but equally profound in its message, the Good Samaritan. Now, this one is famous for its twist ending, where the hero turns out to be someone completely unexpected.
Oh, yes. This one is a real challenge to our assumptions about who deserves our compassion and what it truly means to love our neighbor.
So to recap, for anyone who needs a refresher, this story starts with a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. He's attacked, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road. A priest comes along, sees the man, and passes by on the other side. Then, a Levite, another religious figure, does the same thing.
And that's already shocking to the audience, right? Because priests and Levites were considered the most righteous, the most holy people in Jewish society. They were supposed to be the exemplars of God's law. So their inaction immediately raises the question, what does it really mean to be righteous?
It's like Jesus is setting us up to expect that the hero of this story will be someone who fits the mold of religious piety. But then comes the twist.
Enter the Samaritan. And this is where the real brilliance of the parable lies. Because in the historical context, Samaritans were considered outsiders, even enemies, by the Jewish people. There was this long-standing religious and cultural divide between them.
And so for Jesus to make a Samaritan the hero, the one who shows true compassion and goes above and beyond to help the injured man, that's a radical statement. It's like he's deliberately turning their worldview upside down.
He's challenging his audience to reconsider their prejudices, to expand their definition of neighbor, and to see that true love transcends those artificial boundaries we create.
Okay, so let's unpack the key lessons that Jesus is weaving into this story. What is he trying to teach us about true neighborliness? Because it clearly goes beyond just being geographically close to someone, right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every human being, regardless of their background, beliefs, or social standing. The Samaritan didn't stop to ask about the injured man's religion or ethnicity. He saw a fellow human being in need, and he responded with compassion.
It's about seeing beyond those surface-level differences that we often use to divide ourselves and recognizing our shared humanity.
And that message is so crucial in our world today, isn't it? We live in a time where it's so easy to get caught up in us versus them thinking, to demonize those who are different from us. This parable is a timeless reminder that we're all interconnected, that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others, and that love should have no boundaries.
So it's not just this feel-good story about being nice. It's a radical call to action. It's about challenging our own biases, expanding our circles of compassion, and actively seeking ways to care for those who are marginalized or overlooked.
And it's about recognizing that true love isn't passive. It's not enough to just have good intentions or feel sympathy for those who are suffering. True love requires action. It requires us to get our hands dirty, to step outside our comfort zones, and to actually do something to help.
And that's what's so striking about the Samaritan's actions. He doesn't just offer words of comfort or throw some money at the problem. He personally gets involved in the man's care. He bandages his wounds, takes him to an inn, pays for his lodging, and even promises to cover any additional expenses.
Yeah.
It's a picture of radical generosity and selflessness.
And it's about going above and beyond, isn't it? It's not just about meeting someone's immediate needs, but about ensuring their continued well-being. It's about making a lasting impact.
So it's not just about a one-time act of charity. It's about a commitment to caring for others, to making the world a more just and compassionate place.
And that commitment, that willingness to act, that's what truly sets the Samaritan apart. It's what makes him the hero of the story, despite being someone who would have been considered an outsider, even an enemy by Jesus' audience.
It's a powerful reminder that our actions speak louder than words, and that true love is demonstrated through concrete acts of service and compassion.
And it raises an important question for all of us. How are we living out this principle of active compassion in our own lives?
It's a question worth pondering, isn't it? Because it's easy to get caught up in our own busy lives, our own problems, and overlook the needs of those around us. So let me ask you directly, who are the neighbors we might be overlooking in our own lives? Who are the people who are hurting, who are marginalized, who are in need of our compassion and support?
And even more challenging, who are the people we might be tempted to dismiss, to judge, or to avoid because they're different from us? Because those are often the people who need our love and compassion the most.
It's about pushing past those comfort zones, those preconceived notions, and recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every human being, regardless of their background or beliefs.
And remember, Jesus was a master storyteller, and he deliberately chose these details to provoke his audience, to get them thinking differently. He wanted to challenge their assumptions about who deserves our love and what it truly means to be a follower of God.
So we've got these two powerful parables. The parable of the sower challenging us to cultivate the good soil in our own hearts, and the Good Samaritan calling us to radically redefine what it means to love our neighbor. It's a lot to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore, and in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into the practical implications of these parables. We'll consider how these stories might be told in a modern context, and how their timeless messages can guide us towards a more meaningful and compassionate life in the 21st century.
Welcome back. I don't know about you, but that last discussion left me really thinking about those neighbors we might be overlooking in our own lives.
It's a question that stays with you, isn't it? And what's so striking about the Good Samaritan parable is how Jesus deliberately chose a Samaritan as the hero. To fully grasp why that's so significant, we need to understand the historical context. Back then, the relationship between Jews and Samaritans was deeply strained, marked by centuries of, religious and cultural conflict.
Right. Okay, so remind me about that historical conflict. Why was there so much tension between these groups?
Well, it goes back centuries. The Samaritans were descendants of the Israelites who had intermarried with other groups after the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel. This was in the 8th century BCE. From the Jewish perspective, this intermarriage was a betrayal of their covenant with God, and it led to a split in religious practices and beliefs.
So it wasn't just about geographic proximity, it was a deep-seated religious and cultural divide.
Exactly. And this divide was so significant that Jews traveling from Judea to Galilee would often go out of their way to avoid passing through Samaria. They saw the Samaritans as heretics, as outsiders, as unclean, and this animosity was mutual, Samaritans often reciprocating the hostility.
Wow. So, given that backdrop, it makes Jesus' choice of hero in the parable even more radical, doesn't it?
Absolutely. By making a Samaritan the one who shows true compassion and embodies the love of God, Jesus is directly challenging the prejudices and assumptions of his audience. He's saying that true love transcends those categories we create, those lines we draw between us and them.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to his listeners and saying, look, the people you consider to be your enemies, the people you despise and avoid, might actually be more in tune with God's will than those you consider righteous.
And that's a powerful message that continues to challenge us today. Because, let's face it, we all have our own prejudices, our own biases, our own ingrained ways of seeing the world. This parable invites us to examine those biases, to step outside our comfort zones and to see the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, regardless of their background or beliefs.
It's a reminder that compassion should have no boundaries, that love should be our guiding principle in all our interactions.
And, this idea of neighbor as anyone in need, regardless of their background or beliefs, connects directly to the heart of Jesus' teachings. It echoes his command to love your neighbor as yourself, which is second only to the command to love God.
Right, so it's not just a nice sentiment or a suggestion, it's a fundamental principle of Christian faith.
Exactly. And it's a principle that has profound implications for how we live our lives, how we treat others, and how we engage with the world around us.
It's a call to action, isn't it? It's not enough to just sit back and say, well, that's a nice story.
Yeah.
We need to actively seek ways to embody that spirit of compassion and generosity in our own lives.
And the beautiful thing is that those acts of kindness and compassion, no matter how small they may seem, can have this ripple effect. They can create a chain reaction of love and generosity that spreads throughout our communities and beyond.
Like when you see someone holding the door open for a stranger, or helping an elderly person with their groceries, or simply offering a kind word to someone who's having a rough day. Those small gestures might seem insignificant on their own, but they can have a profound impact on the people around us.
And it's not just about individual acts of kindness, it's also about advocating for systemic change, about working to create a more just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So it's about both individual and collective action. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
And that's a message that's particularly relevant in our world today, where we're facing so many complex challenges. Poverty, inequality, climate change, political polarization, these issues can feel overwhelming. But this parable reminds us that even small acts of love and compassion can make a difference.
It's about taking that first step, however small it might seem, and trusting that our actions can contribute to a greater good.
And remember, the Samaritan didn't have any guarantee that his actions would make a difference. He didn't know if the injured man would survive or if his efforts would be in vain. But he acted anyway, out of a deep sense of compassion and a belief in the inherent worth of every human being.
It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to wait for perfect conditions or guaranteed outcomes to act. We can start right where we are with what we have and trust that our actions, however small they may seem, can contribute to creating a more compassionate and just world.
And that's where the connection between these two parables we've been discussing becomes so powerful. Because in the parable of the sower, we're called to cultivate the good soil within ourselves, to nurture those qualities of love, compassion, and generosity. And in the Good Samaritan, we see those qualities put into action, expressed in tangible ways that make a real difference in the world.
It's like a two-step process. First, we tend to our own inner gardens, and then we allow those gardens to blossom outward, bearing fruit in our interactions with others.
And that fruit might take many forms. It might be a kind word, a helping hand, a donation to a worthy cause, or a commitment to advocating for social justice. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
It's about finding those unique ways that we can be a force for good in the world, using our individual gifts and talents to make a positive impact.
And it's about recognizing that we don't have to be perfect to make a difference. The Samaritan wasn't perfect, and neither are we. But we can all strive to embody those qualities of compassion and generosity to be a source of healing and hope in a world that desperately needs it.
So, we've been exploring these parables through the lens of their historical context, their theological significance, and their relevance to our lives today. But let's shift gears a bit and have some fun with this. What if we tried to reimagine these parables for a modern audience? What kind of stories might Jesus tell if you were speaking to us today?
Oh, I love that idea. It's like we're being invited to step into the role of storytellers ourselves, to find those contemporary equivalents that would capture the essence of these parables while speaking to the unique challenges and opportunities of our time.
Okay, so let's start with the parable of the sower. Instead of a farmer scattering seeds, what's a modern-day equivalent that could represent the different ways we receive and respond to, important messages or ideas?
Well, think about the information overload we all experience every day. The constant barrage of news, social media posts, emails, texts. It's like a digital field with all sorts of seeds being sown.
Ooh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So instead of different types of soil, we could have different types of online engagement.
Exactly. You could have the path, representing those who scroll mindlessly, their attention constantly flitting from one thing to the next without anything really sinking in. They're bombarded with information, but it just washes over them without leaving a trace. Maybe they're addicted to the dopamine rush of those endless feeds, or maybe they're just overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information and unable to process it all.
Then there's the rocky ground. Those who get fired up about a cause or an idea, but their enthusiasm quickly fades when they encounter pushback or challenges. Maybe they share a passionate post on social media, but then retreat when faced with opposing viewpoints or the complexity of real-world issues.
And what about the thorns? Those could represent the distractions that pull us away from meaningful engagement. The endless notifications, the lure of online shopping, the fear of missing out. It's like those important messages, those seeds of truth and wisdom get choked out by all the noise and clutter of the digital world.
Right. It's like we're constantly being pulled in a million different directions, and it's so easy to lose sight of what truly matters.
And then, of course, there's the good soil, those who are intentional about what they consume online, who engage critically and thoughtfully with information, and who allow those messages to shape their actions in the real world. Maybe they're actively seeking out diverse perspectives, engaging in respectful dialogue, or using their online platforms to amplify voices that are often marginalized or ignored.
Those are the folks who are not just passively absorbing information, but actively applying it to their lives, using it to make a positive difference in their communities and beyond.
It's like they're cultivating those digital gardens where empathy, understanding, and positive change can take root and flourish. They're creating spaces for meaningful connection, for constructive dialogue, and for collective action.
I love that image. It really captures the essence of the parable of the sower in a way that feels relevant to our modern experience. It challenges us to be more mindful of our online habits, to ask ourselves what kind of digital soil we're cultivating.
Are we allowing ourselves to be swept away by the endless tide of information? Or are we creating space for those seeds of wisdom and compassion to take root and grow? It's a question worth pondering as we navigate the complexities of the digital age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a great reimagining of the parable of the sower for the digital age. Now, how about the Good Samaritan? How might we update that story to reflect the challenges and opportunities of our time?
Well, the core message of the parable is about recognizing the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their background or beliefs, and about putting that recognition into action, even when it requires us to step outside our comfort zones, to challenge our own biases, and to reach out to those who are different from us.
Okay.
Right.
So instead of a traveler being attacked on a deserted road, maybe we could have someone experiencing homelessness in a bustling city, surrounded by people who are too busy, too distracted, or too afraid to even make eye contact.
Exactly. And instead of a priest and a Levite passing them by, maybe it's people in positions of power and privilege who are too caught up in their own lives to notice the suffering around them. Maybe it's politicians who are more concerned with their own careers than with the needs of their constituents. Or maybe it's wealthy individuals who are content to live in their bubbles of affluence, oblivious to the struggles of those who are less fortunate.
And then our modern-day Good Samaritan could be someone who doesn't fit the stereotypical image of a helper. Maybe it's a teenager who volunteers at a homeless shelter, or a business owner who donates a portion of their profits to support those in need, or a stay-at-home parent who makes sandwiches for the local food bank.
Or maybe it's someone who simply takes the time to listen to that person experiencing homelessness, to treat them with dignity and respect, and to offer a helping hand without judgment. Maybe they offer to buy them a meal or connect them with resources, or simply sit and talk with them, acknowledging their humanity and letting them know that they're not invisible.
I love that. It really flips the script on the traditional hero narrative and shows that anyone can be a force for good, regardless of their age, background, or social status.
And it reminds us that true compassion is not about grand gestures or heroic acts. It's about those everyday moments of kindness and connection that we create with those around us.
It's about being present, paying attention, and asking ourselves, how can I show up for others in a way that makes a real difference?
And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply offer a listening ear, a warm meal, or a helping hand without judgment. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
Those acts of kindness, no matter how small they may seem, can have a ripple effect, creating a more compassionate and just world, one interaction at a time.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, realizing that we're all in this together, and choosing to act in ways that uplift and support one another.
And who knows? Maybe by embodying the spirit of the Good Samaritan in our own lives, we can inspire others to do the same, creating a chain reaction of love and generosity that spreads throughout our communities and beyond.
It's a beautiful vision, isn't it? A world where compassion and empathy are the guiding principles, and where we recognize the inherent dignity and worth of every human being.
It's a world worth striving for sure. And it all starts with those small, everyday acts of kindness and connection. So we've explored how these parables might be reimagined for the digital age, and we've seen how their timeless messages can be applied to the challenges and opportunities of our time. But there's still so much more to uncover. Join us in part 3 of this deep dive as we delve even deeper into the profound wisdom and practical relevance of these simple yet powerful stories. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Jesus' parables. We've been unpacking some serious wisdom from these deceptively simple stories. You know, it's amazing how stories told thousands of years ago can still feel so relevant to our lives today.
It is. It is a real testament to their enduring power, wouldn't you say? These parables tap into something universal about the human experience, They speak to our longing for meaning, our search for connection, and our struggle to live with purpose and compassion.
Absolutely. And, the last 2 parts, we really dug into the parable of the sower and the good Samaritan. We talked about those different types of soil that represent the ways we receive or reject messages of truth. And that radical act of compassion demonstrated by the Samaritan.
Right. And what's striking to me is how Jesus used these stories to really challenge the assumptions of his audience. He wasn't afraid to, push boundaries, to provoke his listeners, and to call them to a higher standard of living.
Right. He wasn't just telling these feel-good stories. He was presenting a radical vision for a more just and compassionate world, a vision that's just as relevant today as it was back then.
Absolutely. And we explored how those parables might be reimagined for a modern context, right? We talked about the digital age as this vast field where information is constantly being sown, and how we need to be mindful of the digital soil we're cultivating.
Right. And we considered how the Good Samaritan story might play out in, a bustling city where someone experiencing homelessness is surrounded by people who are just too busy, too distracted to notice their suffering.
Yeah. It's a challenge to all of us, isn't it, to break free from our self-imposed bubbles and truly see the needs of those around us, to move beyond sympathy and into action, to embody that spirit of radical compassion that the Samaritan so beautifully demonstrated.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are some key takeaways that have resonated with you the most?
Well, for me, it's the emphasis on both personal transformation and outward action. The parables remind us that it's not enough to just have good intentions or warm feelings. We need to cultivate that good soil within ourselves to nurture those qualities of love, compassion, and generosity. But we also need to put those qualities into practice, to let them bear fruit in the world through concrete acts of service and kindness.
I completely agree. It's that balance of inner work and outward expression that really makes these parables so powerful. We're not just called to be passive recipients of God's grace. We're invited to become active participants in the unfolding of God's kingdom here on earth.
Exactly. And that's a pretty empowering thought, isn't it? We're not just waiting around for something to happen. We have a role to play in making the world a more just and compassionate place.
It's like we're each given a small plot of land, a little piece of the kingdom to tend to, and the quality of our harvest will depend on the care and attention we give to that plot.
And we have the power to choose what kind of seeds we plant, what kind of soil we cultivate, and what kind of fruit we allow to grow.
Now, throughout this deep dive, we've been focusing on just 2 of Jesus's parables. But there's so many more to explore, each one offering a unique perspective on the kingdom of God and the way of life that Jesus invites us to embrace.
And what's fascinating is that these parables can be interpreted on multiple levels. They're like onions, layers upon layers of meaning. You can peel back those layers and discover new insights each time you encounter them.
Yeah, it's like they're designed to grow with us, as we journey through life. The meaning we find in them might shift and evolve as our own understanding and experiences deepen.
Exactly. And that's why these parables have stood the test of time. They're not static, fixed pronouncements. They're living, breathing stories that continue to speak to us across cultures and centuries.
So as we conclude this exploration, I want to leave you with a challenge, an invitation to continue the journey on your own.
Oh, what kind of challenge?
Well, we've talked about reimagining these parables for a modern audience. So I challenge you to create your own modern-day parable, a story that captures the essence of Jesus's teachings, a story that speaks to the unique challenges and opportunities of our time, a story that inspires us to live with greater purpose, compassion, and love.
That's a wonderful challenge. And who knows, maybe in sharing those stories with one another, we can collectively weave a new tapestry of wisdom, hope, and possibility for the world.
It's been a real privilege to dive deep into these timeless stories with you. Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining your light.